just wanted to welcome you all to our opening program, though you're very special because only 50 of you got to come today. Maybe some public people will wander in later, but if anybody needs the restroom, it's behind that curtain over there. And if anybody needs the elevator later to go upstairs, see one of us and we'll help you, because it's like an open lift and we have to manually kind of push the button and send you up. So we're very excited today to have Kevin Johnson with us to recreate the life of Private William Webb, an actual Civil War soldier from Hartford who served in the Connecticut 29th Colored Regiment. Mr. Johnson works at the Connecticut State Library in the History and Genealogy Unit, where he and his colleagues did extensive research on the 29th Regiment and on Mr. Webb in particular. Mr. Johnson has been performing the role of Private Webb for over 20 years and given over 600 performances. Wow. Pretty amazing. The 29th Regiment is important to us in Berlin. 11 Black Berlin residents enlisted in the 29th, and 3 of them died during the war. Those were William Morrison, who was killed at Kell House, Virginia in 1864. Sorry, Heidi wrote that. James Smith, also killed at Kell House in 1864, and William Sidney, killed in Richmond, Virginia in 1864. After Mr. Johnson's performance, he will answer questions about Private Webb and the 29th. After that, we invite you to come upstairs for refreshments and to tour the museum. We have 3 new exhibits on display. One is on the Cheney clocks that were made in Berlin by generations of Cheneys. Another is on Berlin women in the suffrage movement, and another is on the Civil War. So now, please silence your phones. Everybody have your phone on. You want to be quiet. And join me in welcoming Private William Webb of the 29th Regiment.
Said I'm free, praise the Lord, I'm free. I'm no longer bound. There's no more chains holding me, and my soul is resting. And it's such a blessing to praise the Lord. Hallelujah, I'm free. Freedom, said it sounds good and it sounds nice. Got to be free. Greetings to all of you. My name is Private William Riley Salisbury Webb of the 29th Connecticut Volunteers, and I fought in the Civil War. Now that old song that you heard me come in on was what our fight was all about. An opportunity and a chance at freedom. When I think back until the time of enlistment, I can still hear Sergeant Alexander Newton say, "I enlist unto this conflict until the clanking of slave chains shall be heard no more." Listen, there's no more clanking, there's no more slave chains. Said I'm free, praise the Lord, I'm free. Freedom, said it sounds good and it sounds nice. Got to be free. Now, before I begin to tell you our story, I always like to stop and give thanks and honor to all of those who have fought and died for our freedom. I think back unto the year 1828. There was a young slave by the name of Nat Turner who had desired to be free. All Nat ever wanted was one day to be free. So he had this vision. And in this vision said if slavery was going to be abolished, somebody had to die. And blood had to be shed. So Nat Turner gathered 59 men and 1 woman, and they tried to overthrow slavery in the South. But he was later captured and he was hanged. Then in 1859, a white gentleman from Torrington, Connecticut, Mr. John Brown, he took up the same vision that Nat had. And John Brown tried to overthrow slavery, but he was also captured and he was hanged. Then in 1863, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and blacks everywhere were set free. And I say to you again, freedom. Said it sounds good and it sounds nice. Got to be free. Now, I was born in the year 1834. My mother's name was Eloisa Johnson, and my dad I did not know. But I always wondered who Dad was. Was Dad a tall man? Was he strong or friendly or kind? But I never had an opportunity to meet him. But in 1840, my mother, she met and she married Mr. Edwin Salisbury of Ellington, Connecticut. Now, Mr. Salisbury was a good man. He owned a nice piece of land, and he taught me all those things that a young man needed to know. He taught me respect and honor, but most of all, how to work with my hands. See, he was everything to me. He was my friend. He was my big brother. Thanks, Dad. But in 1855, I disappointed Dad, and I committed the crime. And I was sent to the Wethersfield State Prison, where I spent 4 years of my life. That old song you just heard me sing about freedom, I just gave it all back. But during that time, it was rumored that war was getting ready to start in our country. The North versus the South. 1861, war started. The North versus the South. Now, blacks weren't allowed to fight not until 1862, when Congress passed an act allowing for the enlistment of colored soldiers. Then in 1863, the War Department established the Bureau of Colored Soldiers. Now, there was nearly 200,000 black soldiers who fought during the Civil War. Comprised of 60 artillery, infantry, engineer, and cavalry units. There was at least 100 black officers. But you see, I wasn't an officer, though. I was just a private. I was one of those little small guys, you see. But man, we served with this gentleman from Middletown, Sergeant Alfred Powers, who stood about 6'4", 245 pounds. See, Sergeant Powers was a big man. And we would all gather around our encampment, and we would sing songs and play cards and drink our coffee and eat our hardtack. Then Sergeant Powers, he would quietly creep up on the scene, and all the soldiers started going, "Here goes Sergeant Powers! Here goes Sergeant Powers! Dead hot!" See, seeing Sergeant Powers gave us that sense of hope, that if a black man could be an officer in the United States Army at that time, then anything was possible with freedom. Anything you wanted to be, you could be with freedom. But it also reminds of the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass said to our men before we marched in the war. Frederick Douglass said, "Once let the black man get upon his person the brass letters U.S., and an eagle on his button, and a musket on his shoulder, and bullets in his pocket, there is no power on earth that can deny that the black man has not earned the right to be a citizen in the United States." Freedom. Said it sounds good and it sounds nice. Got to be free. Anything you want it to be, you could be with freedom. Hello there, Mr. President. Hello there, lawyer, doctor, school teacher, scientist. Anything you want it to be, you could be. But now, as I think back, it's August of 1863, and it's real hot. Sir, I knew it was hot because the sweat was pouring down my face and going into my eyes. It was so hot. But I could still hear the cries coming through the streets of Hartford. "Black man, free men of Hartford, enlist for the war." Nearly 1,500 soldiers enlisted. I enlisted on December 22nd of 1863, but our regiment was not mustered into the United States Army not until March 8th of 1864. Now the reason for this delay was the Confederate Army had put out this huge threat saying if any white officer lead a group of colored soldiers, we're going to torture you. So ma'am, no white officer wanted to lead our men. But oh, praise and thanks be to God, the Colonel William Wooster, who was formerly of the 20th. See, Colonel Wooster was brave, and he led our men into the war. But before going into this great battle, something awesome happened to me. Guess what? Something fascinating, amazing happened to me. Guess what? I got married. I married my bride, Augusta E. Madison. I had to marry her. Oh, she was so attractive. But you see, I didn't get married on that great day alone, you see. Other soldiers married their sweethearts before going into this great battle. But now, it's April 19th, and we're down in New Haven, Connecticut. 29, fall in line, sir. We look like men marching on. We look like men at war. We look like men marching on. We look like men going to war. Oh, what a feeling to look like a man. Somebody who was thought of as nothing but property. But now we were standing on the streets of New Haven and we were looking like men. Hi, Mom. Cousin Elizabeth, Miss Heidi. Oh, it was our time to shine. It was our time to do our part in the Civil War. So we were off. We took this huge steamship, the Warrior, down to Annapolis, Maryland. Now there in Maryland, we were ordered to build forts and to set up camp. So we all began to dig and dig and dig and dig. But one soldier said, I didn't enlist this war to work. I want to be free. Freedom! Said it sounds good and it sounds nice. Got to be free. But because we were U.S. owned, we had to work and build forts and set up camp. So we did. After that, we were ordered to go down to Hilton Head, South Carolina. Now, ma'am, they tell me through all of my time travel that Hilton Head has now become this great vacation place and people go and relax and enjoy life. But back then, war and battle was going on. Our first taste of battle came. Bermuda 100, Virginia. They told us that Bermuda 100, Virginia was the first place where the first 100 slaves had entered into our country. So we wanted to go down and set the captives free. And I remember that day. 29, fall in line, sir. William, Jonathan, Joseph. We were off. Bermuda 100, Virginia. I remember moving through the woods and searching for the Confederate Army. But we didn't see the Confederate Army anywhere. But our orders was to just wait. But it seemed like the longer we waited, the quieter it got. But our orders was to just wait. And ma'am, you can hear the sounds of nature all around, but we were ordered to just wait. But then the officer told us to take our formation. And I could still hear him give the yell, fire, load, fire, load, fire, load, fire, load. All the rest of that day we fought, and we did well. And the officer wrote back, said that those men of the 29th fought brave and gallantly. Black men who were thought of as nothing, fighting brave and gallantly. And I say to you once again, freedom. Said it sounds good and it sounds nice. Got to be free. After that battle, the next day we held back a rebels' attack. Then we overtook Fort Harrison. Then we had to go down and guard New Market Road. Now, ma'am, in guarding New Market Road, see, it was this long territory, and guarding it, if we were to lose ground, we were beginning to lose the Civil War. But if we were to gain ground and get closer and closer to Richmond, and we did well. After that, we were ordered to go down to Petersburg, the site of this huge, huge crater. But sir, let me tell you how the crater come to be. See, the crater is this big hole in the earth, you see. And what happened was the general who was in charge ordered all the soldiers to dig this tunnel that was 500 yards long. But then he asked the men to dig another tunnel that's 75 feet long. But this time, plant explosives in the tunnel. Now, the soldiers, being good men like we were, we all began to dig and dig. Can you guys help me out with a couple of digs? And dig. Oh, you got to get aggressive and dig. Come on, get real loud and dig. One more time and dig. Wait. See, we're digging inside this tunnel, you see. And the Confederate Army began to wonder, what are all the Union soldiers up to? So all of their soldiers took formation, and while we're digging in the tunnel, kaboom! And this big explosion, and body parts are everywhere, and the Confederate Army attacks. Fire! Load! Fire! Load! Fire! Load! Over 2,000 soldiers, black men and white men, gone. Over 2,000 soldiers, gone. In a matter of moments, in a matter of seconds, over 2,000 soldiers, gone. Stop now. And I honor all of those soldiers who have fought and died for our freedom. Over 2,000 soldiers. Ma'am, I don't know if you ever lost anybody close to you like that, but I lost 2 friends in that battle, you see. Ma'am, all I wanted to do was to be free, but I didn't sign up to see my friends die. I just wanted to be free, but they told us that freedom comes with a price. But I didn't want to see my friends die. I just wanted to be free. We couldn't stay there and cry. No, but we had to gain courage. We had to gut it up. We had to become men. So we became men. After that battle, we were ordered to go to the back so we could replenish and gather some more cartridges and to repair our torn and worn clothes. But during that time, Sergeant Alexander Newton, who had made that profound statement about enlisting until the clanking of slave chains was heard no more, he loved to eat chicken. Now, man, being a soldier that loved to eat chicken, he asked a number of us to go to this farm and gather up all these chickens. So, sir, you had all these tall soldiers chasing after these little tiny chickens. Because, see, they were serving you something called a hardtack. And I believe I got a couple of pieces right here. Yeah, they were serving you something called a hardtack. And, ma'am, I want you to listen close and just imagine eating something that sounds like this. Oh, did you hear that? Could you imagine eating something that sounds like this? This is horrible and disgusting, but they wanted us to eat that. But I understood why he wanted the chicken. I understood why he wanted all those good vegetables, not knowing if the next battle was going to be his last. It's late October now, and the weather is starting to change. And I knew it was changing because the musket that I was holding, it was starting to get cold, and all of the wool that you see me wearing wasn't keeping me warm anymore. But our orders was to go down and fight at Kell House. Now, Kell House was this huge landmark we were ordered to fight at. And I could hear the officer give the command once again, fire, load, fire, load, fire, load, fire, load. For 2 days, we fought and battled at Kell House. There we lost nearly 80 soldiers from Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport and Berlin, all soldiers who fought and died for our freedom. After that battle, we were finally recognized, and we were placed with the 5th Brigade and had to guard Newmarket Road, which was that long and important territory. But then on March 9th of 1865, I, Private William Riley Salisbury Webb, sustained an eye injury, and I was discharged because I started to go blind in my left eye. But because I was discharged didn't mean that the war stopped, nor that the 29th quit. But it was said on April 7th, at the close of the Civil War, the 29th Connecticut Volunteers, one of the first regiments to reach Richmond at that time. Those same soldiers ordered to go to Texas where they guarded over 20,000 soldiers. Then they got the call to report home. 29th, fall in line, sir. On November 25th of 1865, the 29th Connecticut Volunteers was paid and went home. Said I'm free. Praise the Lord, I'm free. I'm no longer bound. There's no more chains holding me. The end. Freedom! Said it sounds good and it sounds nice. Got to be free. Come on, I need you to help me out and say it. Freedom!
Freedom!
Sounds good?
Sounds good!
Sounds nice?
Sounds nice!
Got to be free.
Got to be free!
Got to be free. Come on, one more time. Freedom!
Freedom!
Sounds good?
Sounds good!
Sounds nice?
Sounds nice!
Got to be free.
Got to be
Come on,
free!
give yourselves a big hand. Come on. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. How did I do? Did I do okay? It's Heidi, I'm going to ask if I can just get a quick cup of water. Oh, no Mountain Dew yet. That's for later. Don't record that. Don't record it. But as I share with you briefly, this closing moment, thank you all for being present to be a part of this presentation. My name is Kevin Johnson. I'm an employee of the Connecticut State Library History and Genealogy Unit. And what you have just witnessed, thank you, ma'am, is the 693rd time that I've shared that story with the Private Webb. Is that a lot of time? I would have never imagined doing anything 693 times. But how did I get started talking about Private Webb? And then we'll open up for a couple of questions. Got started back in the late 90s. Our agency was asked to do something to honor the black soldiers for the Freedom Trail. You ever heard of the Freedom Trail? So we were asked to participate. So my museum director, Mr. Dean Nelson, who is now retired, I've been doing this for so long, he walks over to me one day at work. He says, "Hey, Kev, how would you like to become Denzel Washington for me?" So you know what I said, right? I said, yeah. So he wanted me to dress like Denzel did in the movie Glory. Remember the movie Glory? He wanted me to dress like Denzel, so I agreed. So we marched down to Bushnell Park in Hartford, the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, and I'm standing there, and we're taking a series of photographs, and I'm being real cool and very stylish, and as we shot those photographs, this young man from the University of Connecticut walks over to me, and he says, "Sir, you look like one of the Buffalo Soldiers." And I told him, "No, sir, not one of the Buffalo Soldiers. They were the black soldiers that actually stayed in the Army after the Civil War, went out west and down to Texas, made a great name for themselves." But I told him, "No, sir, not one of the Buffalo Soldiers." But ma'am, he looks at me real close. He says, "Are you sure you're not Denzel Washington?" I said, "No, sir, no, sir." Started talking about the 54th that Denzel starred in, the Massachusetts Regiment. They were the first Northern African-American regiment to actually get into the Civil War. You had the 1st South Carolina that actually got into the war, but they didn't have any battles. But the 54th, as we know, Fort Wagner was their big battle where they made a great name. But I told them not from the 54th. Then we started talking about our great state of Connecticut. Connecticut enlisted 2 black regiments, the 29th and the 30th. The 30th didn't gather enough soldiers, so what they did, those guys who they did recruit, they placed them immediately with United States Colored Troop, the 31st Regiment. They went right into action. So our guys are still being recruited and trained and prepared for battle. So this gentleman looks at me, he says, Kev, you sound like you know a great deal about the 29th story. How about coming over to the university and just talking to a class about the 29th story? So I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity as an African American to be able to share African American contribution during the Civil War. So I'm looking and I say, sure, I can do it. My museum director standing there, he says, Kev, don't do it, man, don't do it, don't do it. He tells me why. He says, once you take one Civil War presentation, you will never stop telling the story. That date was February 10th of 1998. How many presentations I'm in? 600. So I think Dean was actually correct by saying that. But this story has taken me all across the state of Connecticut and to our local schools and elementary, middle, high schools, our universities, churches, historical societies, libraries. I also have gone into correctional facilities to share the story of Private Webb. Story has even allowed me to travel to New York City and to stand on the great stage of Tanglewood. I had an opportunity to stand on Tanglewood with all of these professional actors and share the story of Private Webb and saluting to America. I would have never imagined CPTV coming through and taking clips and adding me to some of their stories. Would have never imagined from that date in February 10th and agreeing to do that, that this story would actually transform my entire life. And so it's such a great honor to be able to share the story. Private Webb was an actual person that did serve the 29th and in that great place, the Connecticut State Library. So I got to give you my PR moment. The Connecticut State Library, located 231 Capitol Avenue, right across the street from your state capitol, open now from 10 to 2, Monday through Friday. If you haven't visited us, please come and check us out. We are your state library. Come and see us. Was that a good PR moment? So I can always share that, but I always get so much joy in talking about the 29th, but I can share it for a great deal. But just want to give you an opportunity. Anybody had any thoughts or questions that may have come across your mind while I was sharing the story of Private Webb? Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell us about your uniform and describe the things that the soldier carried?
Oh, we jump right to the end part here. That's my exit out. But we'll talk about the uniform. When I had to do that presentation on February 10th of 98, I had to go in and grab a uniform. So in our Museum of Connecticut History, we have old actual Civil War uniforms of some of the guys that served, not with the 29th, but just uniforms of various soldiers. And so I went to the museum and I'm looking and thinking about, boy, I can take a blouse off. And so at the time, I'm 5'10" and a half, I'm about 210 pounds, and pull the blouse off and I'm putting my left arm in. And I go to bring that bad boy around to the right. I'm going, no, sir, this is not going to work. You guys are going to be reading about me on TV for destroying state property. So we had to find a uniform. And so I wanted to actually go into that date and really dress as a period soldier. Singing that old Negro spiritual that you heard me come in on, which my grandparents actually caused us to learn that song. It is a part of my family history and a part of African American history. Song is actually twofold. That shares about freedom from slavery and then freedom from when you die and you go to heaven. So it's actually a great song. When I wrote the script, I thought it was a great opening to be able to come in and share while I'm walking through in the Civil War uniform. I could have gone into that date with a shirt and tie, but I said I need a uniform. So we put together, Dean was a museum Civil War collector and reenactor, so we gathered a uniform. Now my uniform is a replica. It is exactly what our guys would have been issued going into battle. The dark navy blue blouse and the light wool trousers. As you can see, the uniform is all wool. It came in 2 sizes. It either fit or it didn't. So soldiers had to swap to find one that was more suited for them. Even the shirt is a wool blended shirt. And you know when you wear wool for a long time, it starts to irritate. And so I'll have to cut this real short because, yeah, it's going to bother me. And so the uniform is very uncomfortable. One uniform all year round. The buttons were very important for African Americans. The eagles on our button in our citizenship. And so that was huge for black soldiers to be able to have the eagles on their button. There's a great book that we have in our collection entitled just that, Eagles on Their Button. So if you ever get a chance to visit the State Library, check out some of these books in our collection. And then you can see this is our canteen. Great tool and weapon. As we know, drinking water, but some of the officers would have some of those special drinks inside their canteen. Because we got the young man here, we won't go into details with those special drinks, but I like the canteen as I share with our students. Many times, is there a body of water that's nearby? A little pond? What is it? Do you know the name of it, man? Railroad Pond. Would you drink water out of Railroad Pond? I like Railroad Pond. Let's talk about Railroad Pond. Has anyone ever gone down south? Anyone has gone south? Man, where'd you go? Summertime? Georgia. What was weather like, Georgia, summertime? Hot? Maybe some degrees. Sticky?
Humid.
110 in the shade. Our guys are along South Carolina, Georgia border, North Carolina. That's where we are. So just imagine, you got 1,000 guys in the Civil War regiment. Guys leaving a battle, they're disgusting, they're dirty, they're bleeding. They head over to Railroad Pond. Got all these soldiers heading over there, they're washing off in that pond. Here these guys go back to the field. Here come another group, 1,000 men, heading over to Railroad Pond. As they head there, they're in the same condition, they're bleeding, they're disgusting. Soldier decides to take his canteen, dips his water in Railroad Pond. Heads back out into the field. Remember, we're down in Georgia, North Carolina, and we're in the summertime, and I'm wearing what? Whoa. What do you think that soldier's going to do? Take a sip of that water. What do you think's going to happen to him? Dysentery, some other type of disease. Disease, when you think about the Civil War, was one of the #1 killers of Civil War soldiers. You think about all of the battles, but disease is one of the #1 killers. But I always like to say, even drinking unclean water. When we think about the water even today and how we hear so many issues with water, if our soldiers have a chance to purify the water, chances were they can actually get sick from drinking water. But something from a useful tool as a canteen. The haversack is a very valuable bag to a soldier, but many families actually have these in your attics. So when you guys start cleaning out your attics, you may find a haversack. It is one of those Civil War artifacts that isn't highly expensive, but people kept. But this is where the soldier kept all of those food items. They would have those goober beans, salt pork, and the famous hardtack. And so let's talk about the hardtack for a quick moment. I like to describe hardtack. Sir, what grade are you in? 5th? All right, I'm going to use you. In the 5th grade, it always reminds me of a premium saltine. So here we have this young man, he's in the 5th grade. School teacher says, what's your name? Caleb. It tells Caleb, I want you to take this saltine home, and I want you to not open it till you get to the 12th grade. Caleb holds on to it. He says, wow, Dad, I got it. 12th grade, I can open it. He pulls it out. What do you think happened to it, Caleb? What do you think happened to it after from the 5th grade to the 12th grade? What happened to that saltine? It got rotten, all right. What else do you think happened to it? Got hard. What else? Stale. What else? Moldy. And then when we have food that's spoiled, what happens to it? Bugs come out. So just imagine you're in the sticky, hot South and got some hardtack. Reach inside your haversack, pull that hardtack out. All what Caleb described and you guys described. He sees it. What do you think that soldier's going to do? You're going to brush that bad boy home, find him some hot coffee, and eat that hardtack. Hardtack is made of flour and water and a pinch of salt. Oh, was you writing that down, ma'am? Flour and salt, a pinch of water, cooked on about 350 degrees. Take it out of the oven, sit it on your deck or your back porch, then bring it back into the house, let it sit for a few days. You got hardtack. Hardtack actually lasted into World War heart attack. And so one of those, but it's disgusting. It is bad. But as a Civil War reenactor and Civil War storyteller, I have to know about the heart attack. The pieces that I'm actually holding now is probably about 2 years old. So, ma'am, did you? And that's that. The cartridge box. Soldiers were issued going into 20 to 40 pounds of lead, 58 caliber that were firing, had the Springfield musket. I don't carry the musket with me, but we do have one in our museum that we have on exhibit. I started carrying the musket when I first started presenting, but I was walking one day from the State Library heading across to the Legislative Office building. And as I'm walking with this Springfield musket, the state police called over to our agency and saying, "Is that your guy?" Because I was one of the few African American, reenactors. And they call over the state librarian and says, "Kev, I think we need to lose the musket." I haven't carried it, but because I go into more schools now than anything else, I pretty much don't carry the musket with me anymore. But we do have one on display. A very powerful weapon, fired in ranges between 100 to 500 yards, very accurate. And our guys did have one of those. Got him late going into the battle. Private Webb actually got some powder into his eye. That's how he started going blind. And so it started deteriorating the retina, so he was discharged from the service. The last bag, my shoes. The nice broken shoes. This is my second pair of shoes. Actually, I wore out the first pair over the years of presenting. The first pair, this pair also, Dean actually made, my museum guy. Took him actually 52 hours to actually make the shoe. It's just a leather shoe. This one doesn't have a horseshoe on it, but the other shoe would have horseshoes on the bottom. As you know, the horseshoe was there to actually give the shoe some durability. Our guys were the infantry guys, so when you see Civil War guys, the light blue represented infantry. We were the guys that actually took the train or the steamboat, got to the place, and then we had to walk through the fields. So you need a good pair of shoes. We didn't have the same issue as the 54th with Connecticut Regiment. When you saw Denzel escaping and got punished because he was trying to get some shoes, our regiment did not have that issue. But the 54th suffered a lot of the discrimination and a lot of the prejudice that was going on at the time. But the shoes were something that was very valuable and important for our guys. The last bag is the knapsack. As you can see, I need to talk to my quartermaster. My knapsack has had it, but a soldier would carry 2 wool blankets, a rubber gum blanket, which they would put under the tent for rain, just parade coat. They practiced the buddy system, so one guy would carry one half of the tent, and the other soldier would carry the other half of the tent. Letters, Bibles, anything that was dear to them, they would actually keep inside this knapsack. We had a gentleman from the 16th Connecticut that actually weighed every item, and it totaled to be 52 pounds. So could you imagine you're down south, you're in all wool, and you got 52 pounds on your back, then you got guys firing at you. Civil War was a very brutal war that these guys were dealing with going into those battles. Great question, ma'am. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Do you know of any of William Webb's descendants that have seen your performance?
No, ma'am. When I started doing the presentation, I had to actually go back to the library and dig who William Webb was. Had no clue who he was. So when the gentleman asked me from UConn, we wanted to tell the story of someone from Hartford. So we scrolled down the enlistment papers and the finger stopped on William Webb. Had no idea who he was. I think over these 24 years now, or 25 years, I don't believe that we selected Private Webb. I believe the story actually selected me. So think about that. But something I didn't have in mind. But here it is still going. And so we needed to find Private Webb. So I stopped on Private Webb, wanted to share someone from Hartford, started digging in our great H&G collection, our history and genealogy collection, did a basic family genealogy search. And what we do at the State Library is help families find their family history. We help you to start tracing back your family history. So we did that basic search and found his mom and found her marriage to Mr. Salisbury, and it just began to start going from there. He did have a sister. He did marry. I'll tell you about my wife in a moment. And he later dies in 1868. He was born in 1834, dies in 1868. He's left with a house, and we have his probate in our library, in our archives. He's left with a house and $25 in Ellington, Connecticut. So he pretty much dies as a pauper after the Civil War. But I'll tell you about my wife. All right, when I found the document, lost track of Private Webb at one point and found him in prison. So we'll talk about that moment. As we did that, I realized he got married. So I'm looking at the record, and he's 29 years old. As he's going into the Civil War, he's 29. I find this document, and it says that his wife is actually 11 years old. So I'll leave on that point. But since 11, so could you imagine me talking to 5th graders and 4th graders, and just like some of your reaction, I'm like, no. And so in his discharge paper, it actually has his marriage certificate. And so he is 29 years old, but Augusta's not 11. She's actually 14 years old. It's not better, right? All right, so in the period that we always call the marrying season. So when you start looking at your own family history, between 1860 and about 1868, something that we call the marrying season. You'll find many Native American, you'll find many Europeans and Africans actually getting married at young ages. So when you start doing your own family history, you dig back, don't be shocked that your great-great-grandmother might have gotten married at the age of 15. It was something that was not uncommon, something that did happen, but you had to have permission to do so. Sad part about Miss Augusta, she's married at 14, but she later dies at the age of 19. With consumptions, they have no children. My search for them is still trying to find out where they're both buried. So I have no clue. It's not in his probate, his will. I have no idea where Private Webb and Augusta's buried. I believe they're both buried in unmarked graves. And so my search continues to try to figure out where the two of them buried. He did have a sister who later moves into around the Boston, Mass area. She marries into a family that was one of the early prominent families dealing with education for African Americans. But I haven't been able to explore what happened to her after, because I'm on the road presenting all the time. And so we haven't had any relatives that I come across yet from Private Webb. Great question. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
So when you're developing this presentation, how did you kind of come to this person of Private Webb? Because you're talking about the research you did. Were you able to get anything like you personally wrote, or just how did you develop this particular, persona of Private? I mean, did it just come from you, or how did you develop the script?
Great question. One, digging into my own family history, two, looking at from his enlistment paper to the court documents from when he was arrested. He and a buddy of his was caught on the Connecticut River for stealing a boat and some clothes. And so he was captured, taken to Tolland prison, and sentenced to 2 years in Tolland prison. And after not wanting to be at the Tolland prison, he broke out. He escaped. And as he escaped, he was recaptured and added 2 more years to his sentence, where he stayed at the Wethersfield State Prison, where you all know that is the Department of Motor Vehicle in Wethersfield, Connecticut, that area there. And he serves his time. But in looking at all of those documents, to try to get a feel of not only just Private Webb, but of the climate of the day too, and the context of the day for African Americans, and putting and feeling personality. So reading and hoping that it speaks to me from the pages to be able to share the story. But though he didn't leave anything written for him as far as a narrative of his life, but we actually put it together, a paper trail of his actual life. There, the court document does give some feedback from who he possibly was as a person. When I started sharing the story, I didn't want to play Private Webb because I'm thinking he's not like me, so I don't want to tell this guy's story. I want to be the 6'4" guy from Middletown, but I couldn't tell this story. As I was telling one of our librarians, she said, "Kev, but you got to tell Private Webb's story." "Why are you telling his story?" I said, "Because he's just an average guy." When you think about the Civil War, you got guys who are just caught up in this huge event and want to serve. So when I share the story in correctional facilities, bringing hope, because here he is, serves his sentence, but he turns his life around. And so it always gives hope. And so when I think of it from that perspective, Private Webb's life actually gives hope. for this thing called freedom. So that part was really just wanting to just share his story, but the emotions from reading the documents for me, it takes me through such a roller coaster ride. When you're looking at Civil War papers, and from the officers to the actual regimental history, and they're at battles. And when they're at those battles, sometimes it gives the details. So could you imagine seeing Petersburg and over 2,000 people blown up? That's going to do something to you. Oh, that's going to move you. And so there are moments when I'm presenting, the emotion just comes. Because they would share with these guys, they were crying. They're trying to deal with war and death. They're not soldiers. And so that we can tap into. That's just the humanity. And so that part, I always look at the humanity. And that's what the journey of African Americans. When we think about the Civil War, it's our humanity. When we think about the colonial period, it's our humanity. Our freedom is attached to our humanity. And so that's the connection that we have to always make. So when I'm presenting, I just try to make the soldier become human. So when you close your eyes, you just hear this Civil War story. But then when you open them, you see that William Webb was an African American that served in the American Civil War, a turning point in our history. Great question, man, great question. I actually presented at a performance school in Willimantic, where all these young people are striving to be actors. And I'm on this stage and I'm presenting and I'm sharing, and the kids asked the question, said that was a great performance, and I said, no, I don't perform, I'm not an actor, I just play one at the state library. And they started saying, no, that is acting. And I began to start saying to them, what I do is edutainment. We educate and we entertain at the same time, and so that's what acting. And my dad used to always say, Kev, you should be an actor. And I've always took acting very serious, because I think portrayals say something to us. Because I used to grow up pretending to be Barnaby Jones. Anyone remember Barnaby Jones? And my dad said, how could you play this old Caucasian guy? And my mom used to always think I should be a teacher. And so, yeah, at the state library, sharing something my true passion. But any other questions or thoughts before we close off? Yes, sir.
When you saw his enlistment paper, was he able to read and write?
Yes, Private Webb was one of the few guys that's able to read and write. When he was in prison, he was actually a planes maker, which is like drafting, wood carving, so he was able to do that. So he was really a smart guy, according to what the documentation would say, being able to read and write and literate, so he was that.
Oh, wow.
Yes, he was 5'5", about 135 pounds, was a small gentleman that's there. And so hopefully before it all is over, I will be able to find where he's buried, so I can raise a headstone for this gentleman's life that I've shared now for some 20 plus years. Great question, sir. Any other thoughts or questions?
Did you go to school for history?
I did, went to Eastern, yeah. Yeah, but I was studying psychology. But when I started working at the state library in 1988, does that say how old I am? Over 34 years of serving the state library, and now sharing at the state library. Has anyone ever gone to the state library? Wow. And you know we have such fantastic documents, right? And so one of the things that I never lose sight of is when I'm handling a document, and part of my job is overseeing the collection and when people are in the archives to make sure folks don't borrow or damage. And try to help them the best way we can without doing the research for them. But I always stay in awe. History, it awes me. You know, I never want to lose that. When you're handling a 1600 document or 1700 or an enlistment paper, this is an actual person. These events happen when you're dealing with the primary records. And so these are actual things. And so that part I never lose. We handle it every day. I'm passing volumes back and forth, and I just try not to do it with no care. This is what I'm handling, so we have to remind ourselves many times of our collection. And that is so valuable, but it's our history that we want to leave for Caleb. We want the next generation to be able to have these stories and the history so that then they can tell and share the story of our great country. Great question. Yes, ma'am.
With regard to his earlier childhood, you said that his mother married someone who owned property. Now, were they all considered slaves, or was he considered, or?
Mr. Salisbury was free, and he was an African-American gentleman who actually lived in the Ellington area, and he owned some land. As we think about our country, and his mom was born into slavery. Private Webb was not a slave. Connecticut actually abolished slavery in 1848, but you had the gradual abolition of slavery going from 1782 when it started, 1784 we got out of slave trade, gradually emancipation is going, so about 1801, so it shouldn't be any slaves, period, but you know there were some that were still there, but Private Webb, I'm not sure where the Webb part of his name, where that arrived. We believe it may have been out of wedlock, or it could have been the owner of his mom. Haven't been able to find that evidence. That's the part about research. Some stuff you will be able to find, as you all know that visit, some stuff you may not uncover, but his stepdad did own land. And when you find Private Webb in the census, he would go under both names, sometimes using the Webb or Riley or Salisbury for his stepdad. Great question.
The hat, the emblem on the hat, I know it's the 29th, but the symbol that the 29 is on, doesn't that also demonstrate which corps?
We were infantry, yeah. So we were infantry.
Infantry?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Then you have the different ones for heavy artillery and cavalry, all of those. But I'm an infantry guy, so I don't think about the other guys.
The symbol itself, does that represent one of the specific corps?
Not that I know the answer to, but I can find out and give you that answer and email Miss Heidi. And we can get you that answer, but I don't know the answer to that one.
Okay.
Is that an original, Kepi?
No.
That's a replica.
This is a replica. Now, our museum guys, the question was, is this an original? He think we might be able to sell this on eBay. Oh, don't record that. Don't record that. Don't edit that part out. But yeah, because I've worn it so much, and as you can see, it is really worn. This is over 20 years. The only thing that I've changed in my uniform now has been the shoes.
And no right or left.
No right or left, no. The shoes was the only thing I've changed over time. But the blouse is the same blouse that I wore in 1998. Because remember, it came in 2 sizes. Either thin or thin. And remember, I changed. And so I'm going here or I'm going here. You know, and to make it very authentic, I have to make sure that that's the same uniform. Isn't that amazing? That I can still get, the hardest part is doing the belt. It's the hardest part. Caleb, it's hard, man. It's hard. But everything is tactical in what we do. Yes, ma'am. I don't want to hold you all up because I know it's a nice Saturday, so yes.
Are you working on any other characters that you will eventually perform?
Yes, and I'll close there. I am working on one other character. I do portray Jordan Freeman of the American Revolution that was killed at the Battle of Fort Griswold. Remember going to Fort Griswold New London? I do portray his story. Jordan Freeman was an African American that actually killed a British officer at the fort during that battle of September 6th of 1781. When I discovered his story, I was just doing more research. I'm always researching because I don't know everything about the Civil War. And so I'm still learning as we go and as we continue to unfold the mystery and the stories of African American contribution. I'm reading so much stuff, and I came across Jordan Freeman's story. Had no idea who he was, but I wanted to know who this guy was. So I started researching him. I found his some documentation of his life. I said, this is a guy I got to tell his story. This is the beginning of our country's history, and every time I put that patriotic uniform on and I go through the motion of Jordan Freeman's story, I've become an American hero. And so I love sharing this story. The only thing is he dies in battle. And so I've learned to die in battle. I've had kids share with me how to die and so forth. You know, that I need to have blood splattering here and there. Like, no, although it was a brutal battle. I would love to share that story with you one day. It is a great story. It is truly a roller coaster ride because it's at the beginning of our country's history. And for African Americans, it's a turbulent time. It's one of the moments that I always feel our country could have abolished slavery. We could have gotten out of it. It was during the time of the American Revolution. But we held on to the Civil War. So it always heartens. So that character for me goes through this. It's very emotional. And reading some of the documents, it's emotional. And that part is really tough. And then we get to that most important part of his life is when he fights in that battle. And then I'm working on Professor Jim. Professor Jim was the janitor of Trinity College for 50 years. Trinity College, when it first started, he's there in 1823. He works up until he retires. He's known as the janitor. One of the students go back and tell his story, records him, writes a narrative of his life. We have it in the state library. I read that narrative and I'm saying, this is a great guy. But what I love about his story is this is my give back, Ms. Heidi, to our seniors, because I believe our seniors become books. If I get emotional, y'all excuse me, but become an open book. Don't realize how much history you've all seen. And when we think about his title as a janitor, you just see the occupation. But that's not who he is. That's his job. But he was much more than that. And so when they start unfolding his history, this guy has a fascinating life before he gets to the university. And then when he gets to the university, he's helping all these college kids. He's helping these students. But one, he's keeping them out of trouble. Because he says a line, sir, that's going to be my tagline. What I know and you know, nobody else knows. And what I love with that line is you think about how much trouble or stuff that students do on campus. And the one person that's got to know all the details is janitor. And so he's rescuing some of these kids from punishment and expulsion. But I love his story because he becomes this figure. When he leaves the campus, he's a part of one of the big old churches in Hartford. He's one of the founding members. He's connected to all of Pennington and all of these abolitionists. And so his story is fascinating. And then he even has the opportunity. I shouldn't share this with you because if I may come and share, I'll share it. But he actually has an opportunity to be with the captives from the Amistad. Here is who we call a who? Janitor. But yet he's dealing with those from the Amistad. Isn't that amazing? Yes. His story. And so our seniors have so much to offer. When your grandkids or great-grands start talking to you, share. Just let it go. Don't guard it. Just let it go. Raw. Just cut to the chase. Because there's so much that you've all experienced. So that is my contribution. And the last program that I'll probably do before I retire from the State Library, which I probably got about 6 years left. And so that story's already put together. I just have to figure out how do I want to introduce this dynamic character. And so I have a date actually for February of 2024 to unveil Professor Jim. And the great thing that I love about this story is I don't have to remember dates. I don't need to know the exact date because he's 90 years old and I forgot, I don't know the date. So I'm looking forward to telling this guy's story. But if you haven't got a chance to visit the State Library, please do. The journey for me in sharing African American contribution, it is truly a fascinating story. It is American history. And so I share with many of our researchers that come, African Americans have been there from the beginning. And our story is one that is still hidden. And so when you're doing your research, what many authors have done was turn the page. But the proof, the evidence is there. That black served. And so when I told those students, when I put the uniform on, if they forgot every word that Mr. Johnson said as a Civil War story, they would do remember the uniform. And when I walk out, they'll be able to say Connecticut had a black soldier that actually served in the American Civil War. And so with that, I closed. I left some paperwork from our agency. We do have some things that I share within the story. A word search for those of you who like to drink your morning coffee and do a word search. Left that there, some things that I share in the story. But some information about the State Library. If you haven't got a chance to visit us, please do. Check us out. We're your state library. We're just the gatekeepers of that great building that's located at 231 Capitol Avenue. But any last minute question or thought before we close? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you just mentioned coffee,
Yes.
and you mentioned coffee earlier. Could you tell us about Civil War coffee?
I never tasted any of it, so but there's a great book called Heart Attack and Coffee that talks about it. But you may have to share with me. I haven't researched the coffee. Tell us.
Well, I make a coffee at home,
Okay.
and my mom always used to pour a little water over the top of the coffee after it was brewed. Because she always said there was some coffee that was still stuck in the basket, and she wanted to get that out. But I took it further to adding more coffee, more water to it, and my kids would always go crazy because I was watering down the coffee. I didn't mind it. I just wanted something hot to drink. But in the Civil War, I remember reading about a general who was drinking coffee, and his assistant said how good it was only 1 week old. He'd been brewing the same grounds for a week, and they would brew it in garbage cans.
Wow.
I didn't mean to take.
No, that was good. Come on, let's give him a big hand for that. That was great. Thank you for sharing that. So now I'm going to borrow that story when I share it. And that's what the Civil War does. It allows us to be able to grow and talk about this great thing. Last thing that I share with you, I've been doing more diversity programs. As we look at our turning culture now, I've been sharing more. The Civil War gives an opportunity to really deal with all of the stuff that's going on with race. And so it allows us to be able to share and to talk and to see how to make this thing better. And so when I'm doing these programs, it gets everybody on an even plane. Because we can all agree that slavery was wrong, correct? All right. So once we get to that point, now we can just talk about the humanity. And how do we make this thing better? We have to learn from our past to create a better future. And so with that, thank you for allowing me to come. I always call out our school kids when I'm presenting. I walk through the front and I just instill hope. You know, when I call them Mr. President, I'm instilling hope because that's what Frederick Douglass, who actually spoke to our guys going into the war, was telling them, become good guys. When you look at the 29th story, you don't see too many deserters. Guys were willing to just fight because they had this charge in their life. And so when I look at Caleb, that's hope, man. That's hope, man. And so thank you all for allowing me to come. Thank you.